In the small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills, there lived a grandmother named Zainab. She was a woman whose life had seen more seasons than the flowers in the meadow, and each season had its own story. With her silver hair tucked into a neat bun and glasses perched delicately on the bridge of her nose, Zainab was a familiar figure in her community. The children called her Dadi, grandmother, a title she wore with pride, and her warm, wrinkled hands were known to offer comfort with a simple touch. But beyond the surface of kindness and wisdom, Zainab carried a weight, a burden that had grown heavier with the passing years. Zainab's life, though rich in memories, was tinged with loss. She had once been a vibrant young woman, filled with dreams of adventure, love, and a world far bigger than the small town she had been born into. But life, as it often does, had other plans. She had married early, at the tender age of 18, to her childhood sweetheart, Faisal. Their love had been the kind that felt like it could withstand the test of time. Together, they had raised 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. Their home, modest but full of life, was a reflection of their shared dreams. But after 35 years of marriage, fate dealt her a cruel blow. Faisal passed away suddenly, leaving Zainab alone to navigate a world that now seemed unfamiliar and cold. The grief was unlike anything Zainab had ever imagined. At first, she tried to remain strong, for the children, for the family. But with each passing year, the weight of his absence grew. The laughter that once filled the halls of their home was now replaced with silence. She no longer had the energy to tend to the garden they had planted together, nor did she have the will to engage in the social gatherings that once brought her joy. The woman who had once radiated warmth and life now found herself sitting in a corner of her home, the same corner where Faisal's old chair still sat empty. Her children, grown and busy with their own lives, visited less frequently. They had their own families now, wives, husbands, and children who demanded their attention. Zainab understood. They had lives to live, and she didn't want to burden them with her sadness. So, she withdrew further into her shell, content, or perhaps resigned, to the quiet routine of her days. The days blurred into each other, and the years, though full of memories, felt more like an endless, monotonous cycle. The sparkle that had once shone in her eyes began to fade. But even in the midst of this quiet despair, there was something that kept her going: her grandchildren. Zainab had 5 of them, and they were the one source of joy she still held close to her heart. When they visited, their laughter was like a balm to her aching heart. They would run into her arms, their small hands reaching out for comfort, and she would smile, feeling a flicker of warmth return. But deep down, Zainab knew that the woman she used to be was lost somewhere between the pages of time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Zainab sat on the porch, sipping a cup of warm chai. Her fingers gently stroked the old, frayed edges of a photograph she kept in her lap, one of her and Faisal, taken many years ago. She smiled softly, tracing the faces in the picture. Her eyes were filled with nostalgia and longing, but there was also a sense of emptiness. "I miss you, Faisal," she whispered to the wind, as though he might hear her, wherever he was. But the wind, like her heart, offered no answer. The world around her was still almost too still. The air smelled of the earth after a light rain, and the chirping of crickets filled the silence. But Zainab felt a stirring within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if, in that moment, the universe was telling her that life was not done with her yet. She had lived through heartache, loss, and loneliness, but perhaps there was still more to come. Perhaps, in the years she had left, there was room for something new, a rebirth. A gentle tap on the door interrupted her thoughts. Zainab turned to see her youngest granddaughter, Aisha, standing there, her face bright with excitement. "Dottie, Dottie." Aisha's voice rang out, carrying the joy that only a child could have. Zainab smiled, her heart warming at the sight of her. Aisha was 8 years old, with a wild mane of curls and eyes full of curiosity. She reminded Zainab of herself when she was young, full of wonder and dreams. "Come in, my dear," Zainab said, her voice soft but filled with affection. Aisha skipped across the porch and sat beside her grandmother, her small hand slipping into Zainab's larger one. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, watching the world go by. Then, Aisha looked up at her grandmother with an expression of pure honesty. "Dottie, when are you going to smile again?" she asked innocently. "You don't smile much anymore." The question hung in the air, and Zainab felt a pang in her chest. Aisha had always been the one to say things that others were too afraid to voice. And in that moment, Zainab realized the truth of the child's words. She hadn't smiled in a long time, not the kind of smile that came from the heart. It was a gentle, quiet smile, one she put on for the sake of others. But inside, she was not smiling. Aisha's innocent question was like a spark to dry tinder. For the first time in years, Zainab felt the stirrings of something deep within her, a desire to live again, to smile, to find the joy that she had once known. She knew it would not be easy. She knew the road ahead would be long, filled with challenges and doubts. But in that moment, Zainab made a quiet promise to herself. She would find her way back. She would learn to smile again, not just for Aisha, but for herself. "Maybe tomorrow, Aisha," Zainab replied, her voice gentle but filled with a newfound resolve. "Maybe tomorrow I'll smile again." And as the evening sky grew darker and the stars began to twinkle above, Zainab sat on the porch, her heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of a new beginning. Her rebirth had begun, and though she didn't yet know what it would look like, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The morning after her conversation with Aisha, Zainab woke with a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't the usual dull ache of sadness she had carried for years, nor was it the weight of loneliness she had become so accustomed to. No, this feeling was different. It was lighter, almost like a fluttering, something warm that hadn't been there in a long time. Zainab rose from her bed, stretching her limbs with a slow, deliberate grace. The house was quiet, her children had left early for work, and the bustle of the day hadn't yet begun. It was in this quiet, early hour that Zainab allowed herself to simply be. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cool morning air seep through the cracks of the wooden shutters, carrying the earthy scent of the dew-covered garden. She inhaled deeply, savoring the moment of peace. As she wandered into the kitchen, her gaze fell on the old wooden table where her family had gathered for years. The table was a silent witness to birthdays, anniversaries, and countless moments of joy. But today, it was just a table, empty, like so many things in her life had become. But there, in the corner of the room, stood something unexpected. It was a small, potted plant that Aisha had brought over the day before. It was a tiny thing, a gift wrapped in a bright red bough. The vibrant green leaves caught the light streaming in from the window. It seemed so alive, so full of possibility, something Zainab hadn't allowed herself to be in a long time. Without thinking, she walked over to the plant and gently touched its leaves. The sensation was soft and warm, and for a brief moment, Zainab felt connected to it. It was fragile, yes, but it was also resilient. She realized that, like the plant, she too had the potential for growth, for change. She had been dormant for so long, too afraid to push through the soil of her own pain, too afraid to face the sunlight of a new beginning. But now something had shifted. Zainab smiled, just a little. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was a smile born of something deeper than habit. It wasn't a smile of obligation or pretense. It was the first true smile she had felt in years. Later that morning, Zainab found herself pacing around the garden. The sun was higher now, casting a warm, golden light over the flowers, herbs, and bushes that had once thrived under her careful hands. But now, most of the plants looked tired, withered, and neglected. The garden, like her heart, had grown dormant over the years. She knelt beside the faded roses and tenderly touched one of the petals. It was soft, delicate, but it had lost its color. Zainab felt a pang of sadness, but then she shook her head, as if to clear the clouded thoughts that had come over her. Perhaps it was time to bring the garden back to life. just as it was time for her to breathe new life into herself. With newfound determination, Zainab set to work. She pulled weeds from the soil, watered the plants, and trimmed the overgrown branches. Her hands moved with an energy she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just tending to the garden, she was tending to herself. Each action, each movement, felt like a small step toward reclaiming the joy she had lost. As she worked, Zainab thought about the idea of change. It was something she had always feared. Change meant letting go of the past, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that. She had spent so many years clinging to memories, to a life that no longer existed. But what if she could create new memories? What if the future still held possibilities for her, even at her age? The question echoed in her mind as she worked. And as she knelt by the roses, something inside her stirred. It was a moment of realization. Perhaps she could bloom again, just like the flowers in her garden. By noon, Zainab had cleared the weeds and dead plants, and the garden began to look less like a forgotten plot of land and more like something that could one day be beautiful again. She sat back on her heels, taking a moment to admire the space she had transformed. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was a start. That afternoon, as Zainab was sipping her chai on the porch, Aisha appeared once more, this time with a curious look on her face. "Dottie, what did you do?" Aisha asked, her eyes wide with amazement. Zainab's face softened as she gestured to the garden. "I started with the roses," she said simply, though there was a spark in her voice that Aisha had never heard before. "And then I kept going." Aisha looked at her grandmother, eyes scanning her face for the change she had sensed the day before. "You look different, Dottie," she remarked, almost shyly. Zainab chuckled softly, the sound of it a rare, but sweet note in the air. "Maybe I am different, my dear. Maybe I'm just starting to bloom again." Aisha smiled brightly, her face lighting up with a joy that was infectious. "I'm so happy, Dottie," she exclaimed, running to her grandmother and throwing her arms around her. Zainab held her tightly, feeling the warmth of her granddaughter's embrace. For the first time in years, Zainab felt something she hadn't known in a long time. Hope. Aisha's love, the small plant in the kitchen, the vibrant colors of the garden, it was all a reminder that life, no matter how old or tired, could always begin again. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned to deep shades of purple and blue, Zainab sat on the porch, deep in thought. She realized that the spark of change had come not from a single moment, but from many small, quiet moments, the touch of Aisha's hand, the plant's gentle growth, the labor of love she had poured into the garden. She didn't know what the future held, nor what the path ahead would look like. But for the first time in a long time, she felt as though she was on the verge of something beautiful, a journey of rebirth that was only just beginning. And so, with the stars twinkling above her and the quiet hum of the night filling the air, Zainab made a promise to herself. She would keep going, one small step at a time. No longer would she let the weight of the past dictate her future. The woman she was meant to be was still within her, waiting to be uncovered. The days that followed her moment of renewal were filled with small, meaningful changes. Zainab found herself waking earlier, with a sense of purpose that had long been absent from her mornings. Her garden began to show signs of life, and so did she. The air around her, once heavy with the weight of grief and loneliness, now seemed to carry a gentle lightness. But despite these small victories, Zainab knew that a more profound transformation was still needed, one that went deeper than the soil she'd turned and the plants she'd watered. It was time to face the past. That thought had been lingering in her mind since the moment she decided to reclaim her life. But it was easier said than done. Zainab had spent years trying to outrun her memories, burying them under a veil of routine and resignation. Now, as she sat quietly on her porch one afternoon, staring at the sky, she realized that her past was the very thing that had shaped the woman she had become. The fear of confronting it had kept her from moving forward, but perhaps it was time to stop running. Zainab closed her eyes and let her thoughts wander back to a time when she was young, vibrant, and full of hope. The first time she met Faisal, she was just 16. It was at a family gathering, a wedding of distant relatives. Zainab had been sitting with her cousins, laughing and gossiping, when a boy with dark, kind eyes approached their table. His name was Faisal, and though she had never seen him before, something about his presence made her heart flutter. He was confident but not arrogant, kind but not overbearing. He had a quiet charm that made him stand out in a room full of people. For weeks after that meeting, Zainab couldn't stop thinking about him. She hadn't felt that way about anyone before. Faisal, too, had noticed her, and soon, their conversations began. It started with simple exchanges at family gatherings, but over time, they grew closer. They shared stories, dreams, and laughter. Zainab had never known a love so pure, so exciting, and so full of promise. When Faisal proposed to her, Zainab didn't hesitate. She was in love, and she believed that love would carry them through anything. They married young, full of hope for the future. Zainab thought that life would be simple, that the love they shared would be enough to weather any storm. And for many years, it was. They had their first child, a son named Ali, just a year after their wedding. Then came their two daughters, Sarah and Noor, followed by another son, Imran. Zainab found great joy in raising her children. She would often stay up late with them, helping them with their homework or listening to their stories. Faisal was always there too, supporting her in every way, his love for her growing stronger with each passing year. But as with all lives, time had a way of changing things. Zainab's world shifted one fateful day when Faisal, after a routine checkup, was diagnosed with a sudden and severe heart condition. The doctors told them there was nothing they could do. It was one of those rare, cruel situations where everything seemed fine one day, and then the ground disappeared beneath you the next. Zainab remembered how they sat together that night, his hand in hers, as they tried to make sense of the devastation. Faisal had always been so strong, so dependable, and now, the person she had relied on for everything was slipping away. He was gone within a few months, leaving Zainab with nothing but the memories of their life together. Tears welled up in Zainab's eyes as she sat on the porch, the cool breeze stirring her hair. The memories were both painful and beautiful, and she could hardly bear to look back on them. But there was something else too, something she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge for so long. In the years after Faisal's death, Zainab had felt lost. She had tried to fill the emptiness with work, with taking care of the children, with the routines of daily life. But nothing had ever seemed to fill the void. Her grief had been a silent companion, one that followed her into every room, every task, and every conversation. It wasn't just the loss of Faisal that had hurt so much, it was the loss of herself. The Zainab who had been young and full of dreams, the one who had laughed without hesitation and loved without fear, had been buried somewhere beneath the weight of sorrow and responsibility. She had become a shadow of who she once was, trapped in the role of a grieving widow and mother, struggling to find her own identity amidst the needs of everyone else. It was as if Zainab had been living someone else's life for years, going through the motions without ever truly living it. The woman she had been, the one who had dreamed of traveling, of learning new things, of discovering herself, had been locked away in a distant corner of her heart. For years, she had been too afraid to bring her out, too afraid to let go of the pain that had defined her. But sitting on the porch that afternoon, Zainab realized that she could not move forward without confronting this pain. She couldn't let go of the past without truly embracing it, the love, the loss, the dreams she had once had. She had spent too many years clinging to what was gone, holding on to the pain as if it were a part of her, afraid that if she let go, she would lose everything. But now, something was different. Now, she understood that the past was not something to be feared. It was part of her story, and it had shaped the woman she had become. Yes, it had been painful. Yes, it had been filled with heartache. But it had also been filled with love, with beauty, with the joy of raising children, of building a life with someone she had adored. Zainab stood up from her chair, feeling the ground beneath her feet as if she were standing taller than she had in years. She walked to the garden and knelt before the roses once more, her fingers brushing the delicate petals. I am ready now, she whispered to the flowers, as though they could understand her. I am ready to bloom again. The past had shaped her, yes, but it did not define her. Zainab realized that it was time to let go of the chains she had carried for so long. She would never forget Faisal, never forget the love they had shared. But it was time to live again, to stop mourning what was lost and start cherishing what was still possible. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the garden, Zainab smiled. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this journey months ago. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. And with that, she knew her rebirth had truly begun. In the days following her decision to move forward, Zainab found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She had felt the spark of change in her heart, and she had allowed herself to believe, for the first time in years, that transformation was possible. But as with all things in life, the road to renewal was never smooth. The more she tried to embrace this new version of herself, the more obstacles seemed to arise, both from within and from the world around her. It was early one morning when the first signs of struggle began. Zainab had been up before dawn, as usual, and had already completed her morning prayers. The sky was still a soft shade of gray, and the quiet stillness of the house felt like an invitation for reflection. Zainab had spent the past few days tending to her garden with renewed passion, and she had even signed up for a local yoga class, a small but significant step toward restoring her physical health. But today, as she stood in front of the mirror, preparing to leave for her first yoga class, doubt crept in. She looked at her reflection, her face showing the traces of age and years of sorrow, and felt a pang of self-consciousness. Her body, once agile and youthful, now carried the weight of time. Her joints ached, her back stiffened, and her hands, though still strong, trembled slightly from years of neglect. "What are you doing, Zainab?" she asked herself. "Who are you fooling? You're too old for this. You've let too much time pass. It's too late to start over now." She caught herself mid-thought, but it was already too late. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they began to grow quickly, choking the resolve she had nurtured. She stood there, frozen in front of the mirror, the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. The woman in the mirror was not the person she had envisioned herself becoming. She was a woman who had lived through heartache, through years of waiting for life to start again, only to find that time had slipped away. But then, a thought flickered in her mind. Aisha's words echoed softly in her heart. "You look different, Dottie." Zainab had seen the change in her own eyes that day, the glimmer of hope that had begun to flicker. Was she really going to let doubt quash it all now? Taking a deep breath, Zainab straightened her shoulders, forced a smile, and made her way toward the door. She could feel the fear in her chest, but she didn't let it control her. As she walked out into the cool morning air, she reminded herself that this was her choice. Her journey was not meant to be perfect, it was meant to be hers. If she stumbled, she would get up again. That was the only way forward. The first yoga class was far from easy. Zainab felt self-conscious as she entered the small studio, where the soft scent of lavender filled the air. The younger women around her moved gracefully through the poses, their bodies bending and stretching with ease. Zainab, on the other hand, felt stiff and awkward. Her joints creaked as she tried to follow the instructor's movements. Her breath was shallow, and her limbs trembled from the unfamiliarity of it all. As she struggled to hold a pose, a thought crossed her mind. "You're not good enough for this. You're too old. You'll never keep up." The feeling of being out of place, the feeling that her age was an insurmountable barrier, gnawed at her, and for a moment, Zainab considered leaving. But then she remembered the garden. She remembered how it had taken time for the roses to bloom again, how each tiny leaf had fought through the soil to reach the sunlight. Nothing beautiful happened overnight. Zainab closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the moment pass. She was not in a race with anyone but herself. Every step, every breath, every movement was progress.
And that was enough.
After the class, Zainab felt exhausted, but there was also a sense of pride deep in her chest. She had shown up. She had fought through the self-doubt, the fear, and the discomfort. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying. And that in itself was a victory. Over the next few weeks, the struggle continued. Zainab began to experience moments of overwhelming frustration. Her physical health was improving, but slowly. Some days, she felt stronger, more alive, while other days her body rebelled against the new routines she was trying to establish. Yoga became both a source of strength and a reminder of her limitations. Her knees still ached, her back still stiffened after a long day in the garden, and her hands trembled when she tried to hold something for too long. There were mornings when she woke up and felt utterly defeated. She would look at her reflection and wonder if she was fooling herself. Could someone her age really change? Was it realistic to think that she could rebuild the life she had lost? She felt, at times, like the world was moving forward while she was stuck in the past, clinging to memories and the hope that she could somehow reclaim her youth. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging yoga session, Zainab sat on the edge of her bed, her face in her hands. The tears came unexpectedly. She had tried so hard, worked so diligently, yet she still felt incomplete. She longed for the ease with which the younger women in her class moved, the effortless confidence they exuded. She wondered if she would ever find that same comfort in herself. It was in that moment of vulnerability that her phone rang. It was Aisha. "Dottie, how was yoga today?" Aisha's voice was bright and full of curiosity. Zainab wiped her eyes, taking a moment before she responded. "It was hard, my dear," she said softly. "I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing. My body doesn't listen to me the way it used to. I'm not as young as I once was, Aisha." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Aisha's voice came through with surprising wisdom for someone so young. "But Dottie, that's okay. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, right? You're doing it because you want to. And that's what matters." Zainab smiled through her tears, touched by the simplicity and truth in Aisha's words. "You're right, Aisha. It's about showing up. I can't expect everything to change all at once." "You're doing great, Dottie. I'm so proud of you," Aisha said, her voice filled with affection. Zainab let the warmth of her granddaughter's words wash over her. Maybe it wasn't about becoming the woman she once was. Maybe it was about finding a new version of herself, one that was still growing, still evolving, still capable of change. As Zainab ended the call, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. The struggle wasn't a sign of failure. It was simply part of the process. Every step forward, no matter how small, was progress. And it was enough. That evening, Zainab returned to the garden. She stood among the roses, now blooming once again, and closed her eyes. She felt the soft breeze on her face, heard the birds singing in the trees, and listened to the sound of her own breath, steady, peaceful, real. This is just the beginning, she thought, her heart filled with quiet resolve. The struggle is part of the rebirth. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. In the weeks that followed Zainab's realization that the struggle was part of her rebirth, she found herself more committed to her journey. Yet, even with all her efforts, there were days when the weight of self-doubt crept back in, when the tasks ahead seemed insurmountable, and she felt like she was trudging along a path without a clear direction. She had made progress, yes, but it was not without its challenges. The road to renewal was never straightforward, and Zainab was learning that it was okay to lean on others for support. It was time to stop carrying the burden alone. Zainab had always been independent, a woman who prided herself on managing her family and her life on her own. She had raised her children without asking for much help, weathered the loss of Faisal in silence, and carried the weight of her grief with little more than a quiet dignity. But now, as she tried to rebuild herself, she realized that perhaps she had been too proud to ask for help when she truly needed it. The thought of sharing her struggles with others made her uneasy, but she also knew that she couldn't continue on her own. One bright Sunday afternoon, Zainab decided to visit her neighbor, Mrs. Syra. Mrs. Syra had been a longtime friend, someone Zainab had known for over 30 years. Their children had grown up together, and they had spent countless hours chatting over cups of tea, sharing stories about their lives. Saira, unlike Zainab, had always been open about her feelings. She was a woman who never hesitated to express her joy, her sorrow, or her frustrations. In many ways, Saira was the opposite of Zainab, outgoing, lively, and unafraid to ask for help when she needed it. Zainab had always admired Saira for her strength and openness. She decided that it was time to visit her, not just for tea, but because she knew that Saira could offer her a perspective she desperately needed. As Zainab walked the familiar path to Mrs. Saira's home, she noticed the vibrant flowers in Saira's garden, blooming with an exuberance that mirrored the woman's own personality. When Zainab reached the front door, she hesitated for a moment before knocking. A part of her still felt unsure, as if asking for help meant admitting weakness. But she reminded herself that this was not a sign of weakness, but of strength. There was no shame in needing support, especially when embarking on a journey as difficult and personal as the one she was undertaking. Mrs. Saira opened the door almost immediately, her wide smile lighting up her face. "Zainab,
Come in, come in.
it's been too long," she said warmly, ushering her inside. Zainab stepped in, feeling a wave of comfort wash over her. The familiar scent of spices and fresh flowers filled the air, and the cozy, lived-in feel of Saira's home was a sharp contrast to the emptiness Zainab sometimes felt in her own. "I was just about to make some chai," Saira said, already bustling toward the kitchen.
Sit, sit.
"Tell me how you're doing, my dear." Zainab took a seat at the small dining table, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the cup in front of her. She had come here for comfort, but now that she was here, the words didn't come so easily. Saira returned with the tea and sat down across from her, waiting patiently. Zainab knew her well enough to understand that Saira would not press her if she didn't want to talk. But there was something in her friend's eyes, something kind and understanding, that made Zainab feel safe. After a long pause, Zainab finally spoke. "Saira, I'm really trying to change. To live again after all these years. But some days it feels like I'm carrying this weight that won't let me move forward. My body aches, my mind is full of doubts, and I'm not sure I'm strong enough to keep going." Saira listened intently, her face softening as Zainab spoke. When she finished, Saira reached across the table and placed her hand gently on Zainab's. "You've been carrying that weight for so long, Zainab," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "And you've been doing it alone for so long. But you don't have to. You don't have to carry it all by yourself anymore." Zainab's heart tightened at the truth of Saira's words. She had always been so independent, so used to handling everything on her own. But now, as she spoke with Saira, she realized how exhausting that had been. The idea of leaning on someone else felt foreign, even a little frightening. But it also felt freeing, like something she had been missing for a long time. "You're not weak for needing help, Zainab," Saira continued. "None of us are. We're not meant to walk this path alone. I've been through my own struggles, and I've learned that asking for help doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're wise enough to recognize that you can't do it all alone. And that's okay." Zainab nodded, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. "I've always been so afraid of asking for help, Saira. I thought if I let others see how fragile I was, they would see me as weak. I thought if I let go of the grief, the memories, I would lose who I was." Saira gave a small, knowing smile. "You won't lose yourself, Zainab. You'll find yourself again, your true self. The one who's been waiting beneath all the pain. You've spent so many years being the strong one for everyone else, but now it's time to allow yourself to be cared for. It's time to let others see you as you are, not just as the woman who has to carry everything on her own." Zainab took a deep breath, feeling a release she hadn't known she needed. There was something liberating about admitting that she couldn't do it all by herself, that she didn't have to be the pillar of strength for everyone all the time. "I've been so afraid of the change, Saira. I've been afraid of failing, of not being enough. But I want to keep going. I want to find peace again," Zainab said, her voice trembling. "You are enough," Saira replied softly. "You always have been." The two women sat together in silence for a few moments, the weight of their conversation settling between them, both comforting and profound. Zainab realized that she had been so focused on her own journey that she had overlooked the fact that she didn't have to do it alone. She had friends, family, and people who cared for her, people who could offer support when she needed it most. As the afternoon wore on, Zainab felt a renewed sense of strength. She had come to Syra looking for reassurance, and she had found it in the most unexpected of places, in the kindness and wisdom of a friend. Before she left, Syra handed her a small notebook. "Write down your thoughts, Zainab," Syra said with a wink. "It helps. Trust me." Zainab smiled, feeling the first true sense of peace she had experienced in a long time. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but now, with the support of her friends, family, and her own inner resolve, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The days following her visit to Syra's house felt like a quiet turning point in Zainab's life. The struggle she had been enduring now seemed more like a natural part of her journey rather than an insurmountable mountain. She had learned something invaluable. She didn't have to face this alone. In the months that had passed since she had first begun her journey of self-renewal, Zainab had come to understand that her rebirth wasn't just about rediscovering herself, but also about learning how to ask for and accept support from others. Zainab's mornings had shifted as well. She continued to wake early, but now it wasn't just a routine. Each day had purpose. There was a reason behind her rising: to nurture herself, to move forward, and to find joy in the small moments. Her yoga practice had become more than a physical challenge. It had become a way for her to connect with her body and her breath, to honor the strength she had forgotten she possessed. The aching joints were still there, but now they were just reminders of the resilience she had carried through every hardship of her life. Yet, as much as Zainab felt like she was emerging from the dark shadows of the past, there was still a quiet voice inside her, one that whispered doubts when the night grew long. What if this new self isn't the person you thought you could be? What if you can't truly change? But these doubts were softer now, easier to dismiss. The joy of living, of truly being present in her own life, had started to fill the empty spaces where those doubts once took root. On a cool afternoon, Zainab sat on the porch with her journal in her lap, a small notebook gifted to her by Syra. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of fresh grass and blooming flowers from the garden she had lovingly revived. Zainab opened the notebook and began to write. "I used to think that change meant leaving behind the past. I used to think I had to erase everything that hurt me to move forward. But now I know that change isn't about erasure. It's about understanding, healing, and accepting what has come before so that we can embrace what's to come." Zainab's pen moved steadily across the pages as she poured her thoughts into the notebook. Writing had always been an outlet for her, a way to process emotions that couldn't always be spoken aloud. The act of writing now felt like a sacred ritual, one that allowed her to put down the pain and joy she felt in equal measure. As she wrote, a memory from her past surfaced, a memory of Faisal. It was a crisp autumn evening, many years ago, and Zainab and Faisal had been sitting on the porch of their small home, watching the sunset. Their children were young, playing in the yard, their laughter filling the air. Faisal had looked at Zainab then, his eyes soft with love, and said, "No matter how old we get, Zainab, I will always be by your side. And when the time comes, when we grow old and our bodies start to slow down, we will still have each other. That's all that matters." Zainab remembered how she had smiled at him, her heart full of gratitude. At that moment, she had never imagined a life without him, a life that would one day feel incomplete. She had taken his love for granted, never understanding that everything was fragile, that even the most beautiful things could be taken away. But now, sitting on the porch of her home without him, she realized that his love had not been taken from her. It was still there, inside of her, in every memory, in every breath. His love had shaped the woman she had become, and it was a part of her rebirth, not in the way she had once hoped, but in a deeper, more meaningful way. She carried him with her, not in sadness, but in the knowledge that their love had been real, and it had made her who she was. Zainab closed the journal, her hands trembling slightly, but not from fear. She felt something inside her shift, a release, a letting go. She wasn't clinging to the past anymore. She was honoring it, and in doing so, she had found freedom. It wasn't long before her family began to notice the change in her. Her children, who had always been supportive, now saw their mother with new eyes. They could sense the shift in her energy, the quiet strength that now radiated from her. They had grown accustomed to visiting her home and finding her sitting on the porch or in the garden, with her hands deep in the earth. There was a new vibrancy in her face, an inner peace that had once seemed so far out of reach. Ollie, her eldest son, sat with her one afternoon, his brow furrowed in thought. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant. "I've noticed something different about you lately. You seem at peace. I'm glad to see it, but I can't help but wonder, what changed?" Zainab looked at her son, his eyes full of concern and love, and smiled softly. "I'm finally letting go of the things I couldn't control, Ollie," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm accepting the things I can't change. Life isn't about staying stuck in the past, but about moving forward with what you have. I'm learning to do that now, slowly but surely." Ollie nodded, his face softening. "I'm proud of you, Mom. You've always been so strong, but I see something different in you now. Something that makes me feel like you're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay." Zainab felt a warm rush of emotion. She had carried the weight of her family's expectations and her own for so long. To hear her son's words, to feel the quiet pride in his voice, was like a balm to her soul. She was no longer the woman who lived in the shadow of grief. She was something more, someone who had begun to embrace the full spectrum of life, its pain, its beauty, its impermanence. That evening, Zainab stood in her garden, looking out over the flowers she had carefully tended to. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted with soft shades of pink and orange. The flowers bloomed in full glory, their colors vibrant against the fading light. She smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had nurtured these flowers back to life, and in doing so, she had nurtured herself. The garden, like her spirit, had been through seasons of loss and dormancy, but now it was blooming again. It was a living, breathing testament to her own rebirth. Zainab walked slowly through the rows of flowers, her fingers brushing the petals as she moved. She felt alive, not because everything in her life was perfect, but because she had learned to embrace the beauty in imperfection. The weeds, the thorns, the rough patches, they were all part of the process. The same was true for her own journey. As she stood there, bathed in the soft light of the evening, Zainab realized that she was no longer the woman who had feared the passage of time. She was the woman who had learned to grow from it. And in that growth, she had found herself again.